Welcome back to Own Your Faith. I'm Pastor Steve, and in this session we are going to be crossing a big line. You know, for the last 3 sessions we've been looking at you, looking at how God has made you to be special, and we've called it the me that God is creating. You've gotten to look at your personality style, your spiritual gifts, and your particular story. Well, in this session, we're going to shift our focus away from ourselves and start looking at God. We're calling this part, the God who is creating me. And in this first session, we're going to look at the first person of the Trinity. You see, God is this mysterious thing called the Trinity, where God is 3 persons in one God, and each person has a different role to play in this great creation, in this life that we have. And so the first person of the Trinity, which has often been called God the Father, but God's not a man or a woman, so we can call God the Father, the Mother, God the Creator. We're going to look at the first person of the Trinity, and we're going to really ask the question, what is my part in God's creation? And to start off, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a boy named Billy. Now, Billy had a tough life. His father left him and his mother when he was a little boy. And after he left, his mother got Billy a dog. And Billy loved this dog. He called him Bud. And Billy and Bud, they were best of friends. I mean, they did everything together, and they grew up together. And when Billy was just about your age, in early part of high school, times were tough for him and his mom. And his mom got this job where she had to move away for the winters. And so he was going to be gone for a long time. And the place where they were going, they couldn't bring Bud. And this broke Billy's heart, man. He said, what am I going to do with Bud? Well, Billy had made a very good friend, and her name was Jen. And so Billy went to Jen and said, Jen, would you be willing to take in Bud just while I'm gone for the winter? And when I come back, I'll take him back from you. And Jen's like, oh yeah, I love Bud. I'd be happy to take Bud. And so she talked to her parents, and they were willing to do it. So they took Bud in, and Billy and Bud had this really tearful departure. And Billy and his mom moved away for a while, and so there was Jen taking care of Bud. Now things went really well in the beginning. But you know, Jen, she's an active high school student, probably just like you are. And she was part of the traveling basketball team, and she had worked her whole life to get to this point where she could, she was a pretty important player. And you know how those traveling basketball teams work? They're gone on the weekends quite a bit. And so in one particular weekend in January, on a especially cold weekend, Jen was getting ready to go to her tournament for the weekend, and she was super excited, and it was a Friday afternoon, and she let Bud out into the backyard. And then she got distracted, and she got her stuff together, and she and her parents hopped in the van and took off for the weekend. And they forgot to let Bud inside. Well, you can probably guess what happened. It was one of those really bitter cold weekends. And when Jen got home on Sunday afternoon, she found something that she never imagined she would find. But there was Bud just in front of her back door, and he had frozen to death. Well, you can imagine how Billy felt when Jen told him the news. Imagine how you would feel if you were Jen and you had neglected your best friend's pet. That's a tragic story. And I have good news and I have bad news about that story. The good news is I made it up. So there were no animals harmed in the telling of this story. But the bad news is that story is really about you and about me. You see, in this story, Billy is like God. God has this beautiful thing called creation. The planet, the water, the air, the animals, the plants, the flowers. Those are God's special creation, kind of like the way Billy felt about Bud. And we are like Jen. When God created Adam and Eve, He put Adam and Eve in the garden and said, tend for this garden. It's so beautiful. It's so precious to me. Take care of it. That's called being a steward, or one who takes care of something for someone else. Well, I wonder, how do you think we've been doing as the caretakers of God's creation? I'm afraid that we've been a lot like Jen, where we've gotten so absorbed in ourselves that we've kind of let creation out in the cold to die. And so this month, as you get together with your mentor, I want you to think about this question. God, the Father, Mother, Creator of all things, has created this amazing thing called the universe, which we're part of. So the question to ask yourself is, what part do you play in God's creation? We've already talked about who you are, right? You've got special personality, you've got special gifts to contribute, you've got this amazing story that has shaped who you are. But now, what are you going to do with it? So I want you to brainstorm. Think about the environment. What are ways that you can use the gifts God's given you to help take care of this beautiful creation? Or think about this question. As you go throughout your daily routine, how do you see God in everything? You know, some of you may be, like, if you're a dancer, how do you see God in this amazing choreography that's taking place for you, where these bodies come together and just create poetry in motion? Or maybe you're a math person, and as you're doing your equations and learning these amazing things about math, how do you see the beauty and complexity of God in those math problems? Or maybe you're an athlete and you're out there working hard and you are amazed at this thing, this body that God has created for you. How do you see God in that? Or maybe, if you're like me, the place where I see God most intensely is in two different places. One, I go for a walk regularly outside. I mean, in the winter, in the summer, in the fall. And I see God in nature, in the trees and the animals and the complexity of this universe. And I feel closer to God when I'm there. And the other place that I feel God most intensely is when I'm using my mind and learning new things, because God has created me to be a learner. Those are my gifts, right? It's who I am and my passions. And so when I'm using my passions, I feel God intensely present with me. So what about you? How do you fit in God's creation? And how do you see God present? So again, two questions. What can you do to be a better steward of God's creation and not be like Jen with Bud? And two, how do you sense God's presence in your everyday life? Have a great conversation, and we'll see you next time. And enjoy your journey on Own Your Faith.